Hello again, and thanks for staying with us. More on those headline stories for you throughout the course of the morning. But let's bring you this now. South Africa is in the top 20 countries that are most affected by spam calls. That's at least according to data compiled by global caller ID and call blocking app Truecaller. Global trends indicate that the situation is worsening as more people have access to cell phones and are therefore exposed to different types of spams, such as on social media and SMS. Now, my co-anchor Michelle Craig sat down with the senior executive advisor at Truecaller to discuss this. Let's hear what he had to say.
Clayton, it's great to talk to you. Thank you so much for being available to speak to us here on the AM Report. Truecaller, is it doing the work that it's set out to do?
So it's a great question, and thanks for having me, Michelle. Absolutely. I think that the mission was always to ensure trusted communications. And we've grown globally to 330 million monthly active users in 42 countries. South Africa is one of our fastest growing countries in terms of the adoption of Truecaller. And we're seeing great strides in keeping the bad guys out, but making sure that the good guys can get through and engage their clients.
So that says something, doesn't it? That South Africa is seeing a massive uptake for Truecaller, at least on your end. That surely says something about the levels of spam calls in our country.
That's right. And so what we see, and usually, we see South Africa in the top 10 in the world, certainly of the 42 countries we are, in terms of the spam, both the vishing, the voice spam, and the smishing now, the text spam that is coming through. So I think when we see almost a 20% year-over-year increase in the number of Truecaller users, as well as about a 20% increase in spam, it all makes sense. And we only grow there because the solution works.
Yeah. I mean, I want to talk to you more about that, about whether the solution works, because certainly from a personal point of view and people in my circle, we feel like the calls are still getting through. We feel like because we're trying to block spam calls, we're also blocking important work calls.
Exactly.
Is that a balance that you're struggling to make?
It really is. First of all, we're enhancing the data all the time, and the Truecaller models really work on with both technology and with the community. So when we see patterns, calling patterns of very suspicious calls, we score them. We score them more than we block them because we don't want to overfilter and keep the pharmacy or the physician or the school from getting through. So it's a delicate balance that you need to strike. I can say that we are at about identifying 80 to 85% of the calls that come in. It's a very dynamic environment. You can't just publish a whitelist or a blacklist. That's not what we do. There are constantly new users or mobile subscribers, new businesses, and new spammers. And so this is something that has to be done dynamically. And again, because we have such an active community in South Africa, they really help us disposition those calls and say, oh, no, this is a legitimate call. No, this is a spam call. And that really enhances the solution.
Yeah. I mean, is that part of the solution to filtering out more spam calls, that you have a community that's more involved in letting you know what a spam call is?
We do, right? I mean, there's certain things you can look at in terms of anomaly detection and pattern analytics, and you can say, well, thousands of calls are coming from this phone number or group of phone numbers in a very short time, and nobody's answering them. So there could be an inference that that's probably a suspicious call. But it's really the community that says, it's a spam call, it's a fraudulent call. There's a difference, right? There's a difference between a nuisance and actually direct fraud. And, by the same token, no, this is a legitimate call from my bank, this number, and we're then able to say that that is a verified number. And when I say verified, it so happens that South Africa is one of our fastest growing markets for our Truecaller for Business service. And this is how businesses, small, medium, large, can be verified and present themselves to engage their clients, to not be marked and blocked as spam, but to actually show that their logo in some cases, and certainly a verified check mark to say, hey, we have a relationship with you, a business relationship with you, and we should talk.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of the verified check mark, I mean, we've seen how the verified check mark has spiraled on a platform like Twitter. How do you ensure that I'm not, as a spam caller myself, able to buy that verified checkmark?
Yes, so there's a deep vetting and verification process that goes in to confirm it's know your customer, or KYC. Make sure that the enterprise owns those numbers. Make sure that they have shared with us. We may have 100 numbers, but only 20 of them are authorized for outbound calls or for outbound campaigns. And so that level of vetting ensures that we can't get spoofed. But it is interesting, right? What's happening on some other platforms, and we, for us, it's privacy by design for our users and our subscribers. But we want to make sure that we are, as I said, you keep the bad actors away from Truecaller users, while making sure that the important calls really do get through. Recently we just completely redesigned our iOS application. It's much more powerful than anything on the market. It took us a good year to do that. And I think that we work on Apple and Android. We work on any carrier, and we're completely agnostic, and it's free.
Yeah, and it's free, which is the big one. But the spammers themselves are smart, aren't they? I mean, I'm sure that they're finding ways of even getting around the kind of strides you're able to make at Truecaller.
Yes, and I would never claim to be 100% airtight. It's impossible, because they're incredibly agile. And I think the most disturbing thing about these criminals is that they always go after the vulnerable. It could be seniors, it could be young people who are really ambitious. And they're astute technologists and social engineers. So they're psychologists who know what they're doing on a telecom network, and that makes them really, really dangerous. So to stay a step ahead of them, you have to constantly be monitoring, updating, and making sure that you've got more people using the application to protect them at a vulnerable moment.
Yeah. So South Africa, as you say, we rank among the top 20. I think I saw a graph that rated 20 countries, and we were quite high up in those 20 countries for spam calls. Brazil, as I understand it, is leading the pack insofar as being the most spammed country in the world. Right. What's particular about the Brazil case that makes them the most spammed?
So what we see in emerging markets is sometimes it's a combination of things, right? It can be a combination of just a simple trend catching on, and because the spammers and scammers, they love to follow current events, elections, they love natural disasters, they love crises, and because people are vulnerable, right? And that's when they exploit them. I think that in the case of emerging markets like Brazil and South Africa, where the mobile device growth is almost exponential. It is the only device, right? These are not markets where people have, multiple computers and tablets and are using email. Mobile communications is how they work. It's how they socialize. And that's where we see people really victimized.
I mean, the point that you're making about the people behind spam calls is that they're not sitting at home uneducated, just dialing random numbers. These are people with a strategy on how they're going about doing this.
They're absolute campaigns, right? And so one of the things I want to make clear is not every fraudulent call or text is direct financial fraud. It could just be gathering personal information for future identity hijacking, right? And identity theft. And so it's really important that people do remain vigilant. Don't click on links that they get in text messages. Make sure that the call is relative to something they've recently done, or a business relationship or an organizational relationship that they have.
It reminds me of the fake news issue, right? It's difficult to know in an era of Trumpian fake news who to trust.
Yeah, I mean, I think the parallels are similar. And again, our mission is to have safe and trusted communications. And, I think we do a very good job at that. But it requires both, leveraging technology like Truecaller and just trying to be as savvy as possible. And really, I encourage people to talk to their families about this, right? Especially if with seniors, and I said some of these more vulnerable populations, where, you hate to tell them to distrust everything. There's a difference between paranoia and vigilance. And we have to be vigilant. We want to use our phone. We pay a lot for our services. And, simply using a free application like Truecaller can give you a much more higher sense of security.
So would you say it's sort of there are three parts to this conversation. It's using technology like Truecaller. It's your own personal vigilance. But then should the third thing not be some kind of government intervention?
Oh, so that's a great question. And so that I meant to mention that when you asked about Brazil and some of the other emerging markets. Here I'm in Washington, D.C. And, we have a very sophisticated market in terms of robocalling and spam. And we have a lot of regulatory activity going on. I think that you will see regulators and law enforcement take more action here and probably collaborate with companies like ours to address these problems, because we do want legitimate commerce to occur, right? We do want people to be able to take calls from their schools and from their physicians for new job opportunities. And that requires, a public-private cooperation to really nip this in the bud.
Absolutely. Clayton Liabraaten, fascinating discussion.
Well, thanks for having me, Michelle.
Wonderful to talk to you. Thanks,
Bye.
Clayton.
All right,
Bye-bye.
thanks.
A fascinating discussion indeed. Michelle Craig there in conversation with Clayton Liabraaten, who's the Senior Executive Advisor at Truecaller.